Veteran peace negotiator and Palestinian spokesman Saeb Erekat has died. He passed away aged 65 after being infected by the coronavirus. A possible end to the war in Nagorno-Karabakh, but it is a painful deal for the Armenian Prime Minister. His signature of the ceasefire brokered by Russia, prompting angry protesters to storm the Armenian parliament. And Donald Trump pushes ahead with legal challenges to the U.S. presidential election. The U.S. Attorney General telling his staff to look into any substantial allegations. That move prompting the lead prosecutor for election crimes to resign. Hello, everyone. This is France 24. Thank you so much to all of you for tuning in from around the world. I'm Jeannie Godula. Well, we'll start first with this breaking news of the death of Saeb Erekat. For the past 30 years, he served as a spokesman and negotiator for the Palestinians. The American-educated Erekat was involved in nearly every round of peace negotiations between Israel and the Palestinians. Those go back to the landmark Madrid conference in 1991, where Erekat famously showed up draped in a black and white checkered keffiyeh, a symbol of Palestinian nationalism. He tirelessly advocated for a negotiated two-state solution to the decades-old conflict. Erekat died today, aged 65, from COVID-19.
A towering figure well known to international audiences, Saeb Erekat was described as an eloquent champion of the Palestinian cause. Born in Jerusalem in 1955, he received his higher education in the United States before completing a PhD in peace studies in England in 1983. Saeb Erekat led Palestinian negotiations for decades and was chief negotiator during the Oslo Accords and the Camp David Summit in 2000. He was always in pursuit of peace and yet wasn't afraid to call out Israel for what he viewed as aggressive behavior.
Israel must understand that the language of occupation, the language of the continuation of the settlement activities, the language of confiscation of land, non-compliance with agreements signed, the language that Israel is using, whether it's through attacks and through siege and through the escalation of the aggression, is not going to get us anywhere.
Saeb Erekat was known as a Yasser Arafat loyalist. He didn't view his passing as a roadblock to peace, although he was pained by his death.
My heart is broken because President Arafat is dead and the Israeli occupation has not.
In recent years, Saeb Erekat had maintained the title of chief negotiator, even though peace negotiations with Israel had stalled. He described the normalization of ties between the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain and Israel as a poison dagger which would achieve very little.
Israel can bring 193 ambassadors to Tel Aviv. But then what? I am what needs to be solved. I am the problem. They are my problem. I am what needs to be solved. And the only way to have peace in this region is to solve the Palestinian question, is to solve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict.
Despite the shifting alliances in the Middle East, Saeb Erekat always wanted to solve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict with a two-state solution based on borders negotiated to in 1967.
Next to that peace deal meant to end weeks of fighting on the border of Armenia and Azerbaijan, the Armenian Prime Minister saying it was painful to sign the deal that surrenders disputed territory and bows to other demands. But in the face of a defeat on the battlefield, he said he had no other choice. The truce over Nagorno-Karabakh, though, still met with angry protests in Armenia, with demonstrators storming government buildings, including parliament. Sharon Gaffney explains.
Crowds gathered on the streets of the Azerbaijani capital overnight to celebrate the latest ceasefire to end the military conflict in the Nagorno-Karabakh region. But the agreement sparked anger on the streets of Yerevan, with protesters storming government buildings, throwing furniture and smashing chairs. The violence came within minutes of the Armenian Prime Minister announcing on Facebook that he'd agreed to the deal brokered by Russia.
I have made a very hard decision for me and for all of us. I've signed a statement to cease the Karabakh war with the Russian and Azerbaijani presidents from 1 a.m.
The Armenian president described the agreement as historic.
Azərbaycan xalqı nə qədər böyük xalq olduğunu göstərdi. Yenilməz xalq, dəmir iradəli xalq, müzəffər xalq, müzəffər ordumuz.
Vladimir Putin says Russian peacekeepers are being deployed under the terms of the deal.
The republics of Azerbaijan and Armenia are to stop at the positions they have taken. Peacekeeping forces of Russia are being set up along the line of contact in Nagorno-Karabakh and along the corridor connecting Nagorno-Karabakh with the Republic of Armenia.
The disputed region has been run by ethnic Armenians since 1994, but is recognised internationally as Azerbaijani. Several ceasefires have been called since fighting broke out in September, but all have failed. This latest effort appears more likely to hold after Azerbaijani forces took control of the strategically important city of Shushi on Sunday. Under the deal, the two countries have agreed to exchange war prisoners and the bodies of the dead, and to allow for the return of the displaced. Azerbaijan will retain the parts of Nagorno-Karabakh it took control of during the conflict, and Armenia is to withdraw from several more areas close by. Transport and economic links are also set to be unblocked.
It has been 1 week since Election Day in the United States, 3 days since Democrat Joe Biden was declared the winner, and President Donald Trump is still refusing to concede. His Attorney General Bill Barr has now authorized federal prosecutors across the U.S. to pursue allegations of voting irregularities, and this despite no evidence of widespread fraud. That move from the Attorney General prompting the lead prosecutor for election crimes in the U.S. to resign. Sharon Gaffney has more.
Still clinging to its unsupported claims of voting irregularities, the Trump campaign says the battle continues.
This election is not over. Far from it. We have only begun the process of obtaining an accurate, honest vote count. We are fighting for the rights of all Americans who want to have faith and confidence not only in this election, but in the many elections to come.
The campaign is taking legal action in several states and on Monday filed a lawsuit in Pennsylvania seeking an injunction to block the state from certifying its election results. A short time later, it emerged that the U.S. Attorney General had told federal prosecutors to look into the Trump campaign's allegations of widespread voter fraud. In a memo sent to prosecutors, William Barr authorized them to investigate substantial allegations of voting and vote tabulation irregularities, but to ignore specious, speculative, fanciful or far-fetched claims. The instruction was made despite a lack of evidence of any major fraud being committed. Barr, a close ally of Trump, doesn't suggest there's any proof to support the president's allegations. His intervention comes as Trump continues to refuse to concede defeat. Still active on Twitter and taking to his golf course, the president hasn't been seen in public since last week. Most legal experts say his campaign's legal challenges are narrow in scope and unlikely to change the outcome of the election.
And despite those challenges from Donald Trump, Joe Biden is already getting down to work. He is giving a speech today on health care, championing the plan put forth by the Obama administration, of which he, of course, was vice president. The timing of Biden's speech is an important one. It comes just as Obamacare, as it's known, is going before the U.S. Supreme Court in a case that could overturn it. The new Biden administration, though, is still waiting for $10 million in government money that's allocated to help fund the transition process, something that should be just a formality. Selena Sykes explains.
It's a tradition in the world's longest-standing democracy, the transition of power between two presidents on Inauguration Day, as seen here in 2016 when Barack Obama peacefully handed over the reins to Donald Trump. But Joe Biden's arrival at the White House on the 20th of January 2021 is shaping up to be very different. The transition between two presidents is steeped in tradition. Though legally speaking, the Presidential Transition Act of 1963 is meant to facilitate the arrival of a new administration. For that to happen, the General Services Administration, in charge of managing federal agencies, has to give the green light for freeing up funding for the president-elect and his team, worth up to $10 million. But GSA Chief Emily Murphy, appointed by Trump in 2017, is holding off triggering an official transition of power as the incumbent president refuses to recognize his defeat.
GSA ascertains the apparent successful candidate once a winner is clear based on the process laid out in the Constitution.
This means Biden's team is still largely in the dark as it prepares for the president-elect's first day in the White House. The incoming administration has managed to set up a coronavirus task force, but it has been denied access to federal agencies and strategic information.
I just called Governor Clinton over in Little Rock and offered my congratulations. He did run a strong campaign.
No modern presidential candidate has refused to concede since formal concessions became election custom in 1896. Nor has an outgoing president refused to attend their successor's inauguration. In 1992, George Bush Sr. lost his re-election bid to Bill Clinton. The outgoing president left his successor a letter of support on Inauguration Day, cementing another modern presidential tradition.
You will be our president when you read this note. I wish you well. I wish your family well. Your success now is our country's success.
Trump, however, is not known for maintaining presidential norms and has launched legal action to contest Biden's victory.
Let's focus now on that new hope in the fight against COVID-19, a possible vaccine. Drug makers Pfizer and BioNTech say clinical trials show the vaccine is proving to be 90% effective. That initial success means the vaccine could be rolled out to the public as early as this winter once it gets approved. But as Solange Moujin reports now, the vaccine is still in the final stages of testing and far from being mass marketed around the world.
The good news, it's thought to be effective more than 90% of the time. Pfizer and BioNTech announced Monday their vaccine is showing breakthrough promise. But there are some major logistical challenges ahead. Regulators haven't approved it yet. The vaccine requires 2 jabs 3 weeks apart, and the vials need to be kept at exceedingly cold temperatures, or below -70 degrees Celsius, which means hospitals will likely have to administer it.
The public will have to come to the vaccine. We can't bring the vaccine to the public because you can't lug that -70-degree freezer around with you or other things that keep the vaccine really cold. So that will complicate the delivery.
Key safety questions have yet to be answered too, such as how long it provides immunity and if it works just as well on populations that need it most, like the elderly or pregnant women. The European Union had already pre-ordered 200 million doses and the US 100 million of this vaccine. But these first orders won't be enough, so initially medical staff will likely be vaccinated first.
Healthcare workers will be prioritized when the vaccine is in limited quantities. It makes sense because healthcare workers are the front line of defense, and we want to make sure they're protected. And they're also going to be recommending the vaccines.
Pfizer says it plans to produce up to 50 million doses globally this year and 1.3 billion doses next year. Not nearly enough to cover everyone, but other vaccines remain in the works. Nearly a dozen other trials are also at stage 3. And scientists say that collectively that means there's light at the end of this pandemic tunnel.
Brazil's health regulator, meanwhile, has suspended a clinical trial for China's Sinovac coronavirus vaccine, citing a severe adverse event. That news coming as a surprise to even the trial organizers, who say that while there had been a death, it was unrelated to the vaccine. There's no indication now of how long the suspension of the large late-stage trial might last. Meanwhile, France now ranks the 4th highest in the world for the total number of cases of COVID-19. The 7-day average of new infections now stands at over 48,000 per day, the 3rd highest on record. Deaths and hospitalizations in France linked to the disease are sharply up again. The director of the French Health Agency saying the second wave has still yet to peak. Meanwhile, teachers in France are on strike this Tuesday. They say the sanitary measures currently in place for COVID are not enough. Many high school students also taking part in those strikes. That wraps it up for this edition. Thanks so much for watching France 24. Stay with us. I'll be back in 15 minutes with more. In the meantime, focus on Nagorno-Karabakh.